Cool. Well, thank you everybody for joining me on day 3 of PowerShell Summit. This is a really fun experience being here. It's the first time speaking here. Really excited to be here with all of you, and I really appreciate y'all coming to my session today. Excited to talk about some stuff here. Now, before I get started, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I am a keeper of a pair of irrational Shibas. If you don't know Shibas, they are like cats, where that you do not own them. They own you, and you just kind of let them live their lives and you live next to them. So throughout this presentation, you may or may not notice some other references to Shibas. Just look out for that. Whoever figures out how many there are, there's no prize. But for me, I'm also a huge video game enthusiast. I spent some time working in the industry. Worked at a game company where we're responsible for creating the world's largest cowboy simulator. It was a great experience, but I've since left that world, kind of in a new industry, new exciting stuff, still working with PowerShell a lot. I love PowerShell, obviously. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. Throughout my career, the last 20 years of my career, spent a lot of time across all of IT, experiencing a lot, learning a lot through just certifications. And then in the last 10 years, came to really fall in love with PowerShell. It was that first, I think, Jeffrey Snover and Jason Helmick video for V3 that I saw that really changed my career and really start helping me advance my career. I've used PowerShell throughout my career to elevate myself. And through the New York PowerShell user group, thanks to Doug Fink, I came to learn a lot about PowerShell, just how to write better code. And from that, help myself write better code, not just in PowerShell, but in other languages as well. And I think it's a great utility, great tool to start as a launchpad into other languages as well. Cool, so this kind of next bit of the session is gonna be about kind of low-code tools. That's what this whole session is really about. Low-code tools for you in VS Code to help you write better code for yourselves. The idea here is this should be JSON, XML, stuff that's not really making you reinvent the wheel every time you write in code, and that's the entire idea about this whole presentation. We're gonna focus in on writing Plaster templates and writing your modules and creating your modules through Plaster. Taking snippets, and this is something that I love a lot and near and dear to my heart because I use them all the time. When I'm writing in one language and switching over to another, I can take a snippet and get a good reminder on how to write a specific type of function, type of script, and I don't need to worry about all the requirements that I want in my function or script. It's all there in that snippet for me, and I can just make a call to that. We'll take a brief look at VS Code tasks and key maps, if I can remember that. Those are helpful in their own ways. I think the other two components are definitely more important, though. Those are really the drivers for some of these things. And then we'll finish up kind of talking about ways that we can deliver these solutions so that you can be consistent, not just for yourself when you're writing your code, but how your team uses that code as well. I think that's one of the biggest parts of this, is how do you get your team to be consistent about how they're writing their code and how do they deliver their code to everybody on your team. So this is all about making yourselves faster, making your team faster, making your code across your team consistent, making that code easy to manage, making it useful for everybody on your team to take that Plaster template and build the modules that they need to build with the standards that you're setting. And really, it's all about easing the barrier to entry for new people on your team. As they come on, they don't have to go dig into docs, figure out what are your coding standards. They can use something like snippets, get the right set of standards that you're setting, and you're not forcing them down a specific way. You're giving them the tools to succeed themselves. All right, so the first thing we're covering, Plaster. Plaster is just a way to scaffold your projects. It's a great way to just develop all of the files and functions that are required for you, and it is customizable to an extent. There's limitations in what you can do with Plaster. There's only so much that the Plaster engine has in it, and it's kind of aging at this point. There aren't many updates anymore. It is also XML based, so there is kind of a learning curve there. A little bit of time that you need to understand how to format your code inside of that XML to make it a little bit more readable, a bit more friendly for you to use. But the thing is, once you get this template set, you can kind of use it forever. I've used the same template for 5 years at a time, maybe adding minor pieces to it. It's all about making and finding the right set of tools for your team and right standards that you want for your team, and then just using that template for as long as you need it. You can kind of build onto those templates over time if you need to. All right, cool. So let's get into a quick demo of just Plaster as itself on its own. So the first thing you're going to need to do is find that PS resource in the PS gallery. It's going to be this one that is owned and managed by the DevOps Collective. And like I said, this hasn't been updated since 2022, and I think even then that was kind of a minor update. It's not getting a ton of love since then. I think it still works very well for what it needs to do, though. So we're going to go ahead and just install that. And the nice thing about Plaster is it has these templates already built into it. So if you want to just get started today, you can do that right away. You can use any one of these templates here. There's only these two, but the one that you'll want for your script is probably going to be the script module, and that'll get you started at least running a new module manifest. And so we're just going to go ahead and create a new project and show you what that looks like. And I'm just putting this into my local app data folder, and then just targeting that template for that script module. And this is, if you haven't seen Plaster, this is kind of what the actual interface is going to look like. It's going to prompt the user for every step along the way and walk them through the process of creating a new module. And I'm just going to give this a whatever name I want. I'm just going to call this demo. And you can provide it a version if it's not going to be the newest kind of iteration for this. And there are some nice features that you can add in. You see, as you can tell, it's kind of asking me for additional options that I want to include for this. In this case, for Visual Studio Code, it's actually going to create the Visual Studio Code project folder inside of the directory that it creates. So if you want to include things like tasks or snippets or any other kind of project-specific launching details, you can do that inside of that VS Code folder. And so when I run this, it creates all these files here, and it actually shows you any kind of requirements that I might have. So in this case, it actually has a requirement for Pester to be included as well. Just gives you kind of a quick alert that, hey, you already have Pester, you're good to go. And to take a quick look at that, the folder structure, it's just that PSD1, PSM1, and I'm good to go. I have a script module that's ready to rock. And let's just take a quick look inside of VS Code what that looks like. Yeah. So yeah, here's like, it's got that settings JSON. I've got my tasks in here. These are going to be kind of empty for the most part. There's going to be some stuff that's included because of the Plaster template that it came with. But for the most part, there's going to be expecting you to fill in the rest of the information. Anything that you want to go into the PSM1 is now up to you to kind of build that new module for it. And that's kind of the general gist of creating a template, or rather invoking a template. Cool. So this structure is great. This will get you very far with PowerShell. You can use just a PSM1 and a PSD1, and that's perfectly fine. But it gets complicated when you're starting to think about what is your team of 5, 6 people writing a 5,000-line module. What are they doing with this one PSM1 file when they're all contributing to it, and you have to all merge, and there's all sorts of conflicts, and it gets really, really complicated. That doesn't really scale very well. So I'm going to take a little tangent and talk about dot sourcing for a second. I don't know if everybody knows what dot sourcing is, but I think it's just good to level set here and get everybody on the same page as to what dot sourcing is, because I think it is a really great way to just elevate your modules so that you can actually use the dot sourcing technology to create modules that are very scalable, flexible, and easy to use. So dot sourcing, what is it? When I run a script, and I have this script that just is declaring a function, and if I run this script, it runs in its own scope. It's called the script scope. When this script ends, that script scope ends. It no longer knows about that function declaration. So if I were to run that function that I just declared, it has no idea that it ever existed. That's not great. But there is something called dot sourcing. So this period here before you run the script, that'll actually pull it into the current scope of whatever the session is that I'm running at. So now that I run this same function declaration, it's actually going to run in my current session and allow me to output that function, whatever was in there, out to my main session. So that's just a very quick look at dot sourcing. So what does that mean in terms of module design and aspects? Well, what you want to do is, and what I like to do, is at least separate all of your functions into separate files for each one of your functions. Give it a consistent naming pattern. I like to take the name of the function and use that as the file name of the function that you're trying to write for. So your script is really just the function that you're writing inside of that one file. Organize those files inside of different directories. I like to separate it into a public and private function folders. Basically, those private functions are going to be ones that are exclusively running inside of the module, not really intended for anybody to run directly. Whereas the public functions are going to be ones that you want to advertise to users. You want people to use those functions. And really, you're not even worried about what happens inside of your PSM1 file, because the PSM1 template that you're going to run is actually going to be the thing that's handling most of that. It's going to be outputting just a very templatized version of your PSM1, and it's going to be going through and churning through all of your functions inside of each of your public and private folders and just dot sourcing them so that it's inside of that module scope that it's running at, and then you're using export module member as a part of your PSM1 file to pull out the most important public functions that you want. And then, yeah, part of this as well is also just simplifying your PSD1 file as well. I think it's important to realize that you want to use the tools that you have to make your life easier here. So I won't really touch too much on how you do this for your PSD1, but the PSD1 files, I almost never touch these either. These are things that you can incorporate as part of your CI/CD pipeline. So your CI/CD pipeline, whether you want to increment the versioning, that should be something that pulls in from your semantic or conventional commits and understands what the next version is that you want to increment to. And that will allow you to not even worry about touching the versioning. Don't worry about your changelog. That should also get pulled from Git. So as you're doing these conventional commits, all that changelog information is getting incorporated as well. So really, this is all about just trying to simplify what you're actually changing in your module. And really, the only thing you're ever actually going to be changing are those function files. So this is kind of ends up being the general structure that I like to follow. Like I said, each one of these functions or files inside of the public folder, that's just going to be a script that runs that has just that function declaration and establishes your function inside of the module. And just slide over to the next demo here of how to use dot sourcing. So I have a customized plaster template, and I'm going to run through just using that new plaster template. This is designed with dot sourcing in mind. And we'll go ahead and just open up that plaster doc here. So this is a plaster manifest. If you've never seen it before, like I said, it's in XML. I've already organized this in a way that's a little bit more friendly and readable to me. I don't like using XML, and in a lot of cases, it's kind of hard to read. But when you get it and you treat it kind of closer to what we're used to in splatting, I find this to be very easy to read now. At the start of this plaster manifest, there's not a ton of information that's related to anything that goes into the manifest. This is strictly info and metadata for the manifest itself. But where it gets interesting is inside of this parameters block. And this is where you can establish any parameters or prompts that you want your users to enter. So remember when I ran that plaster template or invoke plaster command at the start, it gave me those prompts. This is how you actually write new prompts. And there's a couple different options for what type of templates or parameters these are going to be. So the text option is just a very simple string. You have these username, full name option. This is kind of more customized, but it pulls in information from either your GitHub information. I like to just use whatever the local user account is on the computer. But I think by default, it actually pulls from your Git history. The other nice thing, though, is there's options for pulling in choices. So this is where you can give a user a list of a bunch of different options, and they'd have to select one of those options. But there's also that multi-choice option where they can select from a sorted array of options, and then you want to give them whatever conditional setup inside that plaster output for whatever they're actually trying to do. So in this case, if I want to write this for GitHub, I can include a .github file if I wanted to put that as a conditional on here. And as I scroll down, this content block is actually where I'm doing the bulk of the work. This is just kind of create kind of the blank folders. It's not actually pulling anything from any of the sources, but it's outputting to my customized directories. And these are the actual parameters that I'd entered in at the parameter block, and actually it understands each one of those parameter entries and just outputs it as a part of these entries. And then the last nice thing about this is you can also templatize full files. So when I actually have a file that has some references to variables inside the file, it can actually update those as well in the context of the file without actually having to do any other changes. You can do that as you create your plaster module. Cool. So let's go ahead and create a new module with this new template. And I'm just going to go ahead and splat this settings for both the template path and the destination path in. And again, same kind of format, same step-through process. I'm just going to name this demo. And as you can tell, I'm already getting new options. These are based on the parameters that I'd entered inside that plaster manifest file. And we'll just step through the rest of these. Generally, this is going to be just kind of the same idea, but as you can tell, it created a whole lot more files. These are all structured in the way that I wanted it to be. You can be as opinionated as you want with this. The entire idea is figure out what works for your team and build the template that works best for your team. But it follows along with that same standard that I mentioned before. It even pulled in some snippets because I wanted that as a part of this repo as well. Puts in my format folder and files. Anything that you might have that you want to be consistent across your team is a great option. I definitely recommend looking into it a bit more. Now, you might say, looking at that XML file, that there's a lot of shit in there. It's way too much work for me to create that. I'm not going to do it. There are better ways. And whoops. This is just looking at the folder, but there are easier ways. And if you want to just get the quick and easy button, I would say just use Stucco. Stucco does kind of the same setup. It uses .sourcing for your modules, so it still has that nice manageability for your functions. It has that nice structure that I like to use. Again, very opinionated on how to .source, but I like this option. I think it makes your team, my team, faster when we're trying to write new code. And I'll just cancel out of this because ultimately it is the same process, but you're just going to run the new Stucco module option, and that will just create a new Stucco. It'll run two plaster. It's essentially the same idea that I was just showing you with the other personalized plaster manifest, but this is specifically built into Stucco. Yeah.
Plaster. I know you personal preference to use .sourcing within your.
Yep.
I know there might be some performance trade-offs rather than having all of the functions and TXM on. Have you ever done any sort of testing?
I haven't actually. No, I've always thought of it as just the benefits of having that manageability as being a big payoff for me. I haven't actually done full testing on whether or not it's a lot faster. I don't know. It's a good idea though. Get on. Cool. So the next thing that I do want to talk about is snippets. I like snippets as a way to get my team ready, and snippets is absolutely the thing that you guys got to take out of this. Is just remember that snippets are overlooked all the time because they're really easy to use, really helpful, portable. You can build them and put them into your project and let anybody pull down your repo, and they also have that as a part of their repository, whatever their workspace is. You can actually utilize that directly from the VS Code workspace. And they're not exclusive to PowerShell. I think that's where I really find them to be the most useful. If you've ever used the Bicep extension, it literally works on just snippets, basically. The entire thing is snippets, and it's incredible because you can dial in to whatever kind of specific resource that you might be needing, and it can pull in that as a very self-contained kind of information for that resource, and it already has all that information for you. You can get as granular with this as you want. I like to kind of keep it higher level just for how I want to get the most detailed information for my functions in place. But if I'm switching into another language and I want to create a Python function or Python module and I kind of forget what I need to do for my specific requirements, snippets are a really great way to do this. And again, a great way for you to establish across your team how to templatize your information and what they're expected to write inside of their code. And we'll jump over to snippets. So there are a couple ways to interact with snippets. And you can either create them directly from your user's configuration session. So if you go to the command palette and type in just snippets, and I've already typed this in, but if you go into here and go to configure user snippets, you'll be able to pull up any specific language snippets, and anytime the VS Code window recognizes a specific language type, it'll recognize all the snippets that go into here. Now, I don't typically use the user configuration settings because if I want to share this with other people, it's not a great way to tell them, okay, go into your session, paste this into your settings. There are better ways of doing this, and I'll show you that as well. And I realized before we talk too much more about snippets, though, I need to show you what it's actually doing. So let's go into my module here, oops, and create a new function. So if I'm creating a new function, and I'll just call us remove-log for this module that I have here. And I get to this prompt, and I need to actually create a snippet of code. I need to establish, okay, this is a function, I'm already typing it wrong, and I'm already messing this all up. But what a snippet does is you can just type in a couple letters based on my prefix settings, and it'll actually pull up the information for whatever snippet of code I want to enter in. So I've created this ps-advanced function. This is a workspace snippet, as you can tell, and it gives me this small blurb about the description of what I want this to be, and it actually gives me the full layout of what that snippet will look like inside of my code. Now, what's extra special about this is it also has some environment variables that I'm also pulling in. It actually filled out the function name for me. And just because I had the same file name, that same .sourcing structure that I was talking about, it knew that the function was going to be called the same thing. So I was able to quickly establish that. But the nice thing about this is it's going to tab you through. It's going to guide anybody through the process of establishing all the important information for your function. So I want everybody to always fill out the synopsis field. So logs. And as you can tell, as I'm tabbing through, it's bringing me to the next field of important information that I want people to fill out. And I'm just continually tabbing through. And then you can also be pretty selective about what you want. You can give different options for people. So if I have a different object type, I can select a specific object type. This is just going to be a string object, and it'll actually recognize that as well. And then finally, when I'm done with everything else and I tab through everything else, it just drops me right into my process block, and I'm ready to start coding right away. That's a really neat way of doing this. I think it's really helpful, like I said, for getting your standards across to people on your team, getting them up to speed quicker without having to establish, hey, go look at this wiki page for your first 3 weeks, memorize it. You can get standards built in this way. Now, the other nice thing, so I showed you how to get this through just modifying, running this prefix entry. We can also do is using the keyboard shortcuts, and if you've never looked at the keyboard shortcuts, this kind of goes on forever, and you can kind of create keyboard shortcuts for anything in VS Code. It's not a great way of managing this. There is also a key bindings JSON file. So I'd recommend doing this. And basically you can create whatever key combination you want. Right now I'm actually just using Control P and followed by an F, so it's a sequence of characters. That will use that same advanced function that I was calling just a second ago. And just to show that in practice here, what did I say, Control P F, whoops. It just ran through, created that snippet. Quick and easy way for you to run this quick, very templatized version of what I want my function to look like. All right, so let's talk about what this actually looks like behind the scenes, though. What does that snippet actually look like? So that advanced function one is probably the best one to look at. There's going to be a lot in here to understand. But there's also great blogs about all of these different things. So there's good information on Microsoft Learn for Plaster, great Microsoft Learn doc for snippets as well. And those will all be included in the notes that follow on the Summit page. So the way this works is the prefix is just kind of those characters that I'm going to enter in at function runtime that I want to establish what snippet to run. That description is what I'm just entering in, and this is just straight JSON. It works with all the regular JSON rules, and you have to make sure your spacing is well, spacing doesn't necessarily matter, but your punctuation definitely matters. And then the body is just an array of every line inside of that snippet. Each one of these is going to immediately put in a return, so each one of these follows with a return. But if you want to establish extra white space, that's where that /n is. That will add in some additional white space, and I think it's fairly obvious, but a /t will include a tab. So there's some small, I guess, pieces that you need to understand how this works, but for the most part, it's just kind of pulling in text and just translating it into your snippet. Now, the nice thing about this is there's also some environment variables. So this, remember where it pulled in the function name? This is actually pulling in based on that file name. This is just pulling in, this is part of the snippets engine for you, for lack of a better word. This is actually an option that you can pull in as an environment variable. The other item here is these are variables again. These are how I would actually tab through. So each one of these is numbered, and that's just going to be the order that you're going to step through in your function. So if you wanted to jump down further into the function, you can just use a different number sequence. The other nice thing here is that as I established that this parameter name is going to be as a part of my comment-based help, it also filled in that information further down here and filled in that same entry further down. And then the rest of this is fairly straightforward, kind of follows around along those same standards. Yes, not super friendly to read from this context, but I think as you test it out, it becomes a little bit more clear as you're running it. The last one is this kind of, it's locked inside these two double bars. What this is just your optional choice where it gives you multiple options. Just you feed in an array, and that will be any of those options that you wanted as a part of your snippet. And then the very last thing is this $0. When you use $0, that's where it actually ends the snippet and drops you into the code. So that's where it brought me to the final process block. Everybody good? Cool? Awesome. So that's all cool, but how do I get that to my team? I talked about I can use the .vs code folder inside of my project. I can use this .snippets-code. I can use the snippets personal user extension or user configuration file. That's an option, but I think another nice, neat way, and I don't know if it's the best way, it's just one way that I wanted to present here, is using a VS Code extension. This process is actually a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. I've used this previously to just kind of get a good baseline across all of our systems as people are onboarded onto the team. so they have a good way to have that snippet without even having to do any additional work. You can just incorporate that new package as a part of your configuration management system. Whatever you're using SCCM, you can just dump this in as a part of that user setup. And we'll get into running this next. And yeah, if you've never used or built a VS Code processes, extension process, this is a little bit easier than I thought it was going to be, just because there are great tools already for this. It's something called Yeoman Code Generator that I'm using. It does use NPM just because it's an NPM package. You don't really need Node.js once you've installed this, and really once you've run the Yeoman Code Generator, you probably never need to do this ever again. You could probably actually create a Plaster module or Plaster template to do what Yeoman Code is doing as well. So I'm going to go ahead and install Node.js. And then from NPM, I'm going to install this Yeoman Code Generator. So it's just yo and then space generator dash code. So I'm going to go ahead and run it now. And the command to run Yeoman Code is just yo code. And it'll take a second to actually start up. But you'll notice it's very similar to that Plaster setup, and it's just going to step you through the process of creating a new extension. And so there's a bunch of different options in here. The one that we're going to do is just this code snippet. The other one that I've used a lot is just extension pack. So if you want to share your entire list of extensions across a team so that everybody's consistent, you can create an extension pack, tell them to, or really just install that extension, and it'll pull down all the extensions along with it. And I'm not going to import anything here. We'll call this just PowerShell Summit. And we're fine with that. The language ID that we're going to use is PowerShell. And we will not initialize Git repository. And I messed up because this already exists. Hold on one second. I was practicing earlier, and it clearly already had a conflict there. So one second. And there you go. So very similar to the Plaster set layout. It actually even has the same green text. I don't know if Plaster took that same idea or why it looks so similar, but that's kind of the general idea. And if we just open this up into VS Code, it's just a set of folders and files inside of this directory. The main one that you're going to be looking at is this package.json file. And this is kind of where any kind of configuration that you're going to be using for your package, any metadata for your package is going to go into this packages.json file. When I actually need to write my snippets, though, as you can tell from this reference, it's going to go inside of this snippets directory. And I don't know if this is large enough, but it'll go inside of the snippets directory. Nothing in there right now, but that's kind of the general idea. So yeah, I already have a slightly baked version of this, though, and we'll take a quick look at that as well. And as you can tell, like my package.json file, still basically the same one from the template. Oh, and the other nice thing about this that comes with the Yeoman Code Generator is it also has these nice quick start guides. So I would definitely recommend, this is kind of the reason that I wanted to show you the entire process, because if you need to understand the entire process of how this extension gets created, these quick start guides will really help you guide you through the process of creating your first package. But since we're already a little bit more advanced, already have this baked version ready to go, we'll skip ahead, Rachel Ray style. And so my snippets that I've created are all inside of this snippets directory, ready to go. I've already got this packaged. And what we'll do now is actually run the package command, which does require another extension available in NPM called VSCE. It is created by the VS Code team, I believe. So I'm just going to go into that directory and then use this package command. So this base content URL that I'm entering in, this is just to establish in my README file any kind of reference URLs it actually just uses this as a part of expanding that entire URL for it. And I'm not actually putting the repository information in this because this project isn't technically, I think it is public, but I'm not actually using this as a part of this. And when I just use VSCE code package, this is all still good. And there you go. It's created my new package for me. And I am good to actually import this. Now, the interesting thing about this is VS Code doesn't have a great way of creating and using your own marketplace. That's the only really big downside that I find to using these VSIX extensions is the marketplace that comes with VS Code is just the marketplace from Microsoft, and there's no good way to add an additional marketplace like you can with Visual Studio. Visual Studio will let you add any other feeds that you might have internally, whereas this is kind of limited. What you can do though is, and if you want to go this route, is you can run either installing it to the user extensions directory that will run as, install as that user, and you can use this as a process in SCCM, or if you want to just do this a little bit more easily, since I'm doing this in a demo, I'm just going to install it directly from the VSIX. And then it should be installed as Irrational Shibas. And so that's my new extension that I just created. It has this brief README here, has links to any of the docs that I want to link to, and just pulls me to my GitHub page. Just a nice and easy way for you to share your snippets across your team if you really want to. All right. So the last bit that I want to talk about is, of course, Copilot. Copilot, where does it fit into this? I'm doing a lot of stuff that seems like stuff that Copilot can do, and I think we're going to get there at some point. I think right now, we're still having it learn from my processes, and when I'm using code in my own personal repository that's not using stuff that I have in my Office repository, I'm finding it giving me very different answers and different responses. It's not very consistent. It's not giving me that uniformity that I want, and I can't really rely and trust on it right now. I want to establish standards. It's not going to do that for me right now. Maybe over time, as it learns from my entire team's code process, it can establish that. I think it's not quite there just yet. I definitely feel that it's a very useful tool for writing new code, getting new standards across, but it's not great about being consistent. It's giving me very different answers each time I want to write, and doesn't give me that same level of control that I have with snippets. Cool, so that's kind of everything that I want to cover. I ran a bit faster than I wanted to, but does anybody have any other questions? Happy to answer anything about any of these topics that we covered. Cool. Awesome. Yeah.
I missed it, but how did you get it to the snippet to populate from the environment variables, like the name of the file?
Yeah, so that's actually all built into the snippet itself. So in that case, I actually used the environment variable tm file name base. So if you actually look on the docs for snippets, there's a bunch of environment variables that you can call to, like dates or file names, any references to the local machine. Those are all environment variables that you can call as a part of the snippet.
And then what was the product that you used to build the VS Code extension? Was that Yeoman?
Yeah, Yeoman Code Generator is the one that actually pulls down the extension, and then VSCE is what actually creates the extension itself.
What's your deployment? You deploy through SCCM, where it just installs it, or?
You'd have to put it inside of the user's, I think it's user's VS Code extensions directory. That's probably the simplest way of deploying it.
You just dump it in that folder?
It should load it, yeah. Or you can load a list as a part of when you launch code. I think you can also load it that way. I haven't done it that way in a bit, but so I can't exactly remember the process.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah. I know I put that on there, and I am a little bit fast, so I can actually touch on that too if we want to talk about that. Cool. Yeah. So yeah, script analyzer rules. Let me pull up my demo here. So yeah, anybody that's used PS Script Analyzer, I recommend just using the community rules, to be honest. They're a great standard. There's really no reason to kind of deviate from those rules, I would say. The biggest thing is that if you want specific quality of life kind of scenarios, that's the best case for why you'd want to deviate from any of the rules. PS Script Analyzer, if anybody doesn't know, is just kind of a great linting tool. It's built into VS Code out of the box, but if you haven't are living just in the shell, you'll need to install the actual module for this. And it comes with a bunch of built-in rules already. These are all kind of built for the community. Hard to display this very well, but the list kind of goes on and on. And these are all best standards for how to write your code and how to establish rules for your team. So I have this function here that uses pretty bad code practicing write host, sort rather than sort object, where rather than where dash object. These are all kind of standards as a part of the community script analyzer rule set. I've had some trouble with this earlier, so let me see. Yeah, it's not actually outputting the rules itself, but if I would go into the VS Code window, where this lives. So I have this display bad code function. It'll highlight any of the items that I don't want it to, and I've actually already ruined this. 1 second. So it'll highlight any of the items that I want it to highlight that are essentially bad coding practices. The ways around establishing some of these, there are a couple ways of doing this, and I don't really know, again, there's no real best way of how to distribute the rules that you want to use. But what you can do is create a set of files, and if I can find them 1 second. What I use is actually, it's in the workspace rule set that I've created for this. So if I grab this directory. You can go ahead and actually ignore specific rules. So if I want to allow things like where in here, I can add that as a rule set that it'll allow that specific rule to ignore where. Or if I wanted to add sort, it's just adding in sort or FL. Those are all options that I can then add in to just say, ignore this rule when it runs. Or if I want to allow write host, I can just use this PS avoid write host rule and just let it run. You might be asking, like, where do I actually get that info for what that is? When you actually run PS Script Analyzer, it actually displays the rule that it's hitting. So that's where this PS used approved verbs is. That's where I'm actually getting that rule for which ones to avoid, which ones to use. And then when I'm actually in this version, I've already kind of I think I got rid of too many, so it's hard to tell where it which ones it's allowing. But if I were to take out this FL here, save that. And if I come back here, it takes a second sometimes to reload it. It should still highlight one of these. Yeah, it's not quite doing a great job of demoing it, but that's generally the main idea. Is you create a PSD1 file or PSD1 file, yeah, PSD1 file that has the rules that you want to evaluate or not evaluate, any exceptions to the rules that you want to create, and then you can stick that inside of your workspace as a setting and load that setting into your workspace. Haven't really quite figured out the best way to distribute this, because you can't put it as a part of the workspace, as a part of the VS Code rules. It has to be a part of the workspace rules. Still trying to figure out a better way of distributing it, but that's kind of the general idea of whether you want to, allow specific types of verbs or rules. You can do it through this kind of framework here. Cool. Yeah, well, yeah, that gets a lot more complicated. You can kind of do whatever, though. It is a PowerShell-ish code, but it gets very complicated very quickly. So I tend to stick to just the community rules myself. Cool, all good. Anybody have any other questions or want to see anything else? All right, thank you, everybody. In case you want.